is up, my ninjas? I'm Strident, and welcome to my video. Today we are taking a look at the amazing Yamaguchi, or Revoltech amazing Yamaguchi PSYLOCKE figure. Now this is one that's been on my radar for a long time. From the minute I saw her, having, had a couple Revoltechs in my time, I knew she would fit perfectly in my collection and look awesome next to my X-Men, because variety is the spice of life when it comes to that team. The problem is that they just keep, for a long time, they kept ignoring us and giving us, figures from other teams and not allowing us to finish our X-Men. Thankfully, I've been collecting since the Toy Biz days, so I have, a mixture of Toy Biz and Hasbro and Revoltech, because whoever makes, and Marvel Select, because whoever makes the better representation, they're going to go in my collection, because forget all the OCD bullshit. Marvel made those characters. The designs came from the comics. If the designs are accurately represented in action figure form, then they belong in the same, universe. And for some of you, that's the same shelf or series of shelves. And for me, this is the way to go about doing it. This Gambit is not probably going to be outdone by the new one, unless we're talking about the amazing Yamaguchi version that's coming. But sculpt-wise, the Hasbro one is going to look better, but it's not going to be as posable as this one. You know what I mean? So there's a give and take. But with the amazing Yamaguchi line, that seems to be the thing. A lot of collectors, that collect superhero figures have not been collecting import figures. So the aesthetics and the choices being made when it comes to, articulation versus sculpt seem to be confusing for a lot of these collectors. And for me, if the figure looks halfway decent just standing there, but then I can make it get into whatever position, whatever pose, especially the signature poses of the character, then I'm game. And you already know from my collection leans more in the import direction and a little bit less in the domestic direction. So I got a lot to cover, a lot to point out, a lot to say. So get something to eat, get something to drink, sit back, relax, and we're going to go over the good, the bad, and the ugly as always. And here we go. All right, this is PSYLOCKE. I knew out the gate that the paint job was going to be off the rails with this slightly metallic, very gloss finish blue on her costuming. And I knew that they were going to go in this direction because that's the most realistic version of the color. Even in the bad, X-Men film that she showed up in, it had the metallic sheen to it. They kind of went in the leather direction, but a little bit further by making it look like a different kind of heavier material, and I like it. There's zero slop on this figure, none whatsoever, and this is what's supposed to be expected from an import figure. There's chipping. There's a lot of areas where the paint chipped or like two spots kind of rubbed, but there's no slop, and she looks good from every angle. Granted, you have to allow for some of the choices in cuts for joints and the shape of the joints and the way they protrude in certain areas, but getting her in these poses is amazing to see, and it makes me happy because that's the way I remember her. I was a huge fan of this archetype that came from her. One of my best friends growing up used to call these girls the ninja bitch. And he designed characters too and did comics as well. But he used to call him, he was much older than me at the time, he used to call him the ninja bitch. So girls like Zealot, Psyblade, from all these other teams, they kind of were following this archetype. But you could see she looks dope with your X-Men. I mean, she looks almost better than they do. I always put her with Gambit and Wolverine because of this in X-Men #1 from the 90s. And, like I said, with the exception of the pink sash, which sometimes is red like you see here, this is what she looked like when I was growing up. So this is the version that's etched into my mind. But I do have an issue. And it kind of falls into the sculpt, but the articulation. With her hair. The hair is beautifully colored. It's a transparent or translucent, I'm sorry, purple, lavenderish combination. There's a lot of color going. There's blue in there too. There's some pink, but it's not posable. You know, there's a big, it sits on a joint in the back of her head, but outside of that, it's not like the individual long strands aren't posable, and they didn't give you an alternate to give her the hair that she really has. You know what I mean? Like in the comics, she typically has all her hair to one side and it's out of the way. She usually doesn't have all this shit going on. So it looks cool when you put her in that one slashing or jump kick spin or jump spin kick pose or something like that. But or when she's doing like the side blade dance or whatever, but it just doesn't look legit when you can't put all her hair to the side. We're back to the figure itself and the sculpt and the paint. Like I said, in any position that you put her in, you know, the paint is accurate, her colors look good, the sculpting gives her anatomy that is reminiscent of the anatomy in the early X-Men books. Like I said, my only gripe is her hair. I love, you know, the length of her legs, the thickness of the legs. It really feels like how she appeared in those books. You can pull off a lot of, I know this is more articulation, but this kind of plays into sculpting, is that despite the choices made for the joints, you can still put her in poses that mimic what she was able to do in other media. And that's an extremely important place or area for me. I like being able to recreate what I see other places, because you know I collect movie figures and I've been collecting Kamen Riders for a long time, and they're from live action. But she can do it all. The best thing is that there is no clicking going on these joints, which is normally synonymous with the Revoltech joints, but she can still hold those poses with no problems. So I give them props for that. They're doing a really good job switching from the clicky joints to the smooth joints, because I heard a lot of US collectors complain about clicky joints and all that stuff. But individual preference aside, she does it all and she does it well. And you know, you shouldn't have too many problems with the sculpt and the look of this figure in action, and that's what it's all about. Accessories. So she comes with a shit ton of accessories. The cool thing is that they're all variations for the most part. I should say for the most part, not all of them, but for the most part, they're variations on things that we see her use and do in comic books often. And she's been doing this stuff since when she first showed up. I want to say in like the what 70s, 80s, something like that. I think it was the 80s. She's, you know, she has a nice variety of hands. One hand is for actually three of the hands are for very specific things. She's got two sheaths, sword in the sheath and just the empty sheath by itself, and then she's got a plethora of swords. The faceplate, both faceplates contain movable eyes. It's kind of strange, but they work. And then of course you have the little tool to move the eyes. I'm using the one that came with Solid Snake because I lost hers almost immediately upon opening the package. I don't know where it popped out to. Then of course you have the figure and the stand. You can see she's on the stand there. It's a very good stand. But let's talk about these hands. So you have the sheath with the sword in it and the hands to hold the sheath at her side, like you often see you know, in anime. Then you have the holding things hands, specifically designed for the swords. They're fairly decent holding stuff. And then she has two pairs of, well, she has pairs of holding thing hands, but she has two swords, two sets of, two katanas. Two different sets, the glowing set and the standard set. The glowing set is really cool. It's got this translucent purple to pink kind of plastic going on with the blade, showing that she's infused the blade with her psychic energies, which is dope, or her psionic energies, because that's something she's been doing from day one. She used to have the original had a blade on her wrist that she would infuse with her, you know, powers, and she used it to beat Wolverine. Then we have the actual side blades themselves. I like them. They're a pain in the ass to get in her hands, but I'll go into more detail about that. The faceplate. This is a problem, and it bothers me, and it's bothered a lot of other people too. The faceplate doesn't fixed to the actual head itself. It just plugs into the top of her hair from the inside, so it can easily just fall out. Yes, you can move it and stuff with this tool, because Solid Snake had movable eyes too, and I think the Revoltech cap also had movable eyes. I think most of them do, but yeah, sometimes when you're moving her around, the faceplate just falls out. You know, there it is from the back. It kind of frustrates me, and I know it frustrates a lot of other people. It's hard to keep her faceplate in. If you have her posed on a shelf, chances are it won't fall off. But other than that, it probably will. Anyway, back to the figure and the stand. I really dig these stands. They're almost as good as, if not a little bit sturdier than the ones that Figuarts gives us. And I was really surprised because the previous Revoltech stands were garbage. I mean, they kind of did the job. Excuse me. But there was no way for you to tighten the joint to make sure that it could hold up the weight, support the weight of the figure. So the fact that they went for a more traditional joint, you know, that works, that you can actually tighten the screws to make sure it holds the character up. You have several holes, and also you have the option to just plug the stand directly into the back of the figure, which is dope. Notice that on the sash, the part that's hanging down, there's that hole. That's where the piece that holds the sheath in goes. But anyway, as you can see, this here is one of the what do they call them? The Figuarts stands. There's a name for them. I forgot. It's been so long. But you see the holes all over that thing. These here are the Mafex ones. The Mafex stands only have the two holes, 3 holes, and the one that it usually comes plugged into if it's plugged in. But you see that the Revoltech one, it mimics the Figuarts one really well. And once again, you can take the clamp off and plug the stand itself directly into the backs of the figures, and they all have a hole on their back somewhere. The clamp itself, or whatever you call these, it holds the figure up really well. It's not like the Figuarts one where they're not held in, and typically they pop off really easily. These don't seem to pop off at all. I didn't have any issues. I mean, you can pop them off, but you have to use a considerable amount of force to get them to pop off, which is dope, because the problem I kept having is that they kept popping off depending on the pose that I put the figures in. So I like that. Once again, here's a close-up on the base of the stand with all the different peg holes for you to move the peg to the perfect spot. You actually have a peg in the dead center of the stand, which is dope, because sometimes you need that, because you need even space all over it to support the weight of the figure and not flip over. But the feeling, the way it's segmented and everything, it reminds me of the Figuarts stands, and that's not a bad thing. If you're going to copy off anybody, Figuarts should be, you know, the guys you copy off of, because engineering-wise, they are easily the best. Mafex may get the sculpts down and the paint's almost perfect, but Figuarts is the best engineering, hands down. Articulation. So this isn't going to be a traditional articulation area. It's going to be more of a showcase of her articulation. Pretty much, if you can tell from these poses, you should be able to tell from these poses that there isn't really that much of a limit to what this figure can do. I can put her in the most ninja-tastic of ninja poses that you can think of, and there's no problem. Now, the only gripe I do have is that she didn't come with the magic hands. You know what I'm talking about? With the 2 fingers up. But you can see she's got the peg for the peg that plugs into the sash so that you can put the sword and the sheath in there. And you can swap them out depending on what you want her to be doing, but she also has hands to support it. Her wrists, you can pose them however you want. She's got an amazing range of motion. The elbows work really well. The shoulder joints are beautiful. The fact that you can fully extend them or hide them behind the, you know, you can kind of see it here. There's that big ball shoulder peg. It's not quite a universal. It's almost like a double ball hinge shoulder. But it's fixed into the figure really well. But look at these poses. It looks natural. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can push the plastic arm, you know, the shoulder and the bicep down on top of the joint to cover up the actual apparatus, you know, the actual full-on joint. And I dig that. It makes it, you know, a lot easier for us as, you know, people who take photos of our figures to have them doing what we want them to do. I dig the coloring of the joints, which is something that Figma and Revoltech do really well, as the colors match really well. They're not perfect, which is strange to me. You'd think by now, since it's their proprietary joint system, they would have the colors to match the paint perfectly. But, you know, it is a toy after all, so there are things that we have to just kind of, you know, stop being so critical of and just take it as it is. And the joints work for me. I don't have any issues with those. Now, it could be because I have prior experience with Revoltechs that I don't have issues with this one, but the end result is so good that I can't complain about what steps they had to take to get us there, because she still looks better than so many domestic figures. I mean, all the shortcomings aside, she looks 100% better than any other PSYLOCKE figure that we've ever gotten. Her body is more on point. The proportions of her body are more on point. And like I said, when you move her and you pose her, everything fits where it's supposed to fit. I mean, just where it's supposed to fit. Look at the wrist motion. You know what I mean? She can actually support her blade the way that we see ninjas and martial artists do when they have a sword in their hands, you know? And I need that. I can't do that with my Marvel Legends, you know what I mean? Still, we can't do that with our Marvel Legends. You can do a okay facsimile, but I can't get this crazy with it, you know? And I said this about Saber 2.0, which is why she's one of my favorite toys of all time, if not my favorite figure of the last, I don't know how many years, you know? But PSYLOCKE is fucking posable. I mean, there's like really very little that I can't make her do. And a lot of the joints that are problematic when you do pose her, if you pay attention to how the joints work, you can close them up, and then you don't have to worry about gappage, or you get less gappage. You know what I mean? Like the knee joints, they are a double, you know, Revoltech joint, but you can push the shin, the back of the shin closer, or the front of the shin closer to the joint to close up that gap, and that works really well for me. Same thing goes for the shoulders. The torso area is pretty good. Sometimes you will find that when you pose her and stuff and you move that middle torso piece, that it does give way to gappage, but you can move her a certain way usually to close that all up. And also, she's thick in the hips, so depending on which direction you have her hips moving and you have her torso moving, you get less room for the gappage because that piece fits directly into, you know, her big old childbearing hips. And I dig it. It looks really good. Here's some more detail on that blade. But you see how she's moving, how she's, you know, positioned in a spin. The hair and everything is working for the benefit of the pose. And I think that's what it's all about. That's what makes these things work. That's what drove me to want this figure. I think that's what drives a lot of the people who are getting into this, the people who are, you know, not import collectors, but they're being wowed by what they see. It's the fact that you finally have a figure that was engineered to be free when you pose it. It's not like when you get your Legends and they can only do so many things, and if you got one that had a trench coat, you already know what the limitations are going to be when you get this one with a trench coat. You know what I'm saying? Or you get, you know, this Spider-Man figure, and he's still, after 20 years of Marvel Legends figures, 20 plus, he can't do stuff, you know what I mean? Like, or almost 20 years of Marvel Legends. He still can't do Spider-Man stuff, you know what I mean? There's certain figures that can, but most of them can't. So it's awesome to see that she is not limited by anything. It seems like I can pose her however I want. I don't really have to think too hard about, you know, getting things in the right positions to look official. She just looks official from whatever pose, and the joints help to achieve that. The torso cleans up really well, though. I mean, like, I was amazed, shoulders and the torso, it cleans up real well. You can even get the eyes, which it's a point of articulation, is moving the eyes to get the eyes to focus where she's going. You'll notice that a couple of the action scenes that I created, she's doing these no-look attacks, because often if you're that slick, you can floss and just look away from them. It's not just being lazy. A lot of it's intentional. At first, I was like, I'm going to make her look everywhere she's going. But then when I looked at her face, I was kind of like, maybe she should just, kind of not give a shit. And she seems like she would be arrogant enough to not give a shit. You know what I mean? When she's fighting whoever, she wants to show that she is better. But I really like the way that the articulation helps work towards a full experience with this figure. A lot of people, I hear them complaining, and it's these, only collected Marvel Legends, only collected domestic, and now you've jumped into this because they're making characters that fit into your wheelhouse, and they're all confused about what to do with the figure. And it's like, if you've ever played with a toy, even some Legends don't have, perfect joints and such. I mean, like that, what's going on over there can get annoying. But if you pay attention to what it's supposed to do, it's kind of a no-brainer, and it shouldn't deter you from, making this figure part of your collection. I think seeing her in action gives you all the information that you need. She's got the head is on the top of the head is on a joint. The neck is on a Revoltech joint. So you have the segments, the head and the neck can move independently, so you can do all the different positions that you need to do. The biggest problem is that the hair sometimes gets in the way. The hair, the big swooshing hair on the back, is on its own joint. That can move up and down, and that's it. You can kind of get some twist, but I mean, what's the point? It just bumps up against her shoulders and her back. Her upper torso is on a Revoltech joint, so you can swivel that all around. You got to turn to get it to do some of the work. The shoulders are on a double Revoltech joint, so you get the twist in the top of the shoulder, and you get a twist at the elbow, single joint at the elbow, but it gives you so much range of motion, way more than 90 degrees. Same thing goes for the hands. The mid-torso is connected to a ball at the bottom of the torso that goes into her hips and her legs, and that has a ton of motion too. The hips are on, they look like universal Revoltech joints, so you can get them doing anything. Splits, bends, all kinds of things. The knees, same deal, but the knees are a double Revoltech joint, just like the shoulders, and you can push them. Sometimes when you pose her, you will see that in her knees, the lower part of the leg that connects to the knee joint, there's gappage. But depending on the pose, you can push her that part back up, and it will kind of clean up nicely and not be all open. But her feet, same deal as the wrists and the elbows, and then she's got toe joints, and depending on how you twist the feet, you can get a pivot going on, like you see here for that sickle foot when she kicks Nobunaga in the face. But like the splits and everything are dope. I mean, some people, and I know they're out there, I haven't watched many reviews of this figure yet, which is why, I've been working on this thing since I got it, off and on. She's got gappage in the crotch, which this happens with Figmas, it happens sometimes with Figuarts, it happens with many other Revoltechs, and sometimes it happens with NECA figures because they use ball joints for the hips. You're just going to have to, position her in a way where it's not as obvious. Now, she has a swivel at the thigh, but it's a swivel and a joint. You can bend. It's kind of weird, but the Figuarts, the latest Figuarts kind of have this thing going on too. I showed it to you on the Batman from Justice League. The backs of her knees, this might be a sore spot for a lot of people, but if you've collected Figmas or Revoltechs in the past, that's how they achieve the crazy bends, is that you have a bigger ball joint. It's like a ball hinge that sits behind the knees and allows for all that bend. In the front, it cleans up perfectly. You don't have to worry when she's standing up straight or her leg is extended. But I'm going to go into some more detail real quick about, I think, the shoulders. You can see that from certain angles, if you don't press them down or if you can't press them down, the shoulders are going to look goofy. You know, they're going to look robotic, so to speak. But there's a lot of range afforded to you with this kind of joint scheme. I don't have any issues with it at all. You know, I thought I was going to because I'm the Wolverine, I guess because he's bigger. It looks terrible. And Spider-Man, it looks weird. Excuse me. But here, it doesn't look so bad. I don't have a problem with it. I feel like the only area where the articulation is gimmicky and I don't like it is the hair. The hair should have been two separate pieces. You should have had a piece that was big and flowy and a piece that was to the side. Here's the gappage I was talking about in the crotch. Now, it all depends on you. If you focus on that kind of thing, then you might have issues with it. If you are giving this toy credit for being a toy and you just want to see the cool pose, you'll be happy. Because I was happy, you know what I mean? Like, this is literally what I get these kind of figures for. I want to be able to pose them and not have any issues with, you know, what I want, the kind of poses I want her to take on. You know, she's nimble, she's agile. As you've seen, I recreated moves that she has in Marvel vs. Capcom and the various X-Men games she popped up in the past. And I think she does all of that stuff really well, and I don't have any issues with it. So I think the articulation is on point. It's literally what the amazing Yamaguchi line is built upon. So, you know, there you have it. All right, let's compare. So, obviously the comparison is going to be with the Capcom stuff. I've already put her with some of the X-Men, so here she is standing next to Chun-Li, and you can see, I think that they did a great job. The thickness is there, the musculature is there, even though they didn't get into as much detail as Figuarts did with Chun-Li's legs, and for very good reason, because, you know, Psylocke is more on the thick side, not on the muscular side, you know what I mean? So I dig this, you know, difference, you know, this variety in you know, the approach. I dig it a lot. And here she is next to Ryu. For a little while, this was actually a team I used to use when I played Marvel vs. Capcom 3 for the time that I was really playing that game. But you see how she scales up with some of the dudes, you know, and Ryu is kind of the average, you know, height for these figures, and she's just a little shorter than he is, which is appropriate because she's not supposed to be ginormous compared to Ryu or Chun-Li, you know. So I like that. I like that she's more on the shorter side. I figured I would put her next to these guys, though, because this was what you kept hearing more of in the... Jesus, this cold will not leave me alone. This is what you kept hearing more of in the comments. Even when people were comparing her to X-Men and Marvel Legends figures, people were constantly comparing her, wanting comparisons with the Capcom-oriented stuff. So, you know, here you go. At the end, you'll see a picture with some other characters as well. But yeah, that's the comparison. So now we come to the bottom line. It's really simple, but I'm going to be long-winded about why this figure is as dope as they told you it was going to be. I mean, just look at her. If you read X-Men in the 90s, there's certain things that you've always wanted your Psylocke figures to do, and this one can do it. Granted, there are, you know, there's issues in certain areas, mainly the hair and it's like the head. Some people don't like the anime face. I don't care. The anime face works because if you light her correctly, you get a shadow on one side or the other, which is the way it's supposed to be. And she either looks more, you know, Caucasian because she's supposed to be British, or depending on, you know, the poses and the way the angles you look at the eyes from, you get more of an anime look, which is cool because, you know, how in anime, characters can be from wherever and have those, you know, purple hair and all that craziness. So I don't mind it. It still makes her look exotic, and it's simplistic enough that you don't have to really try too hard when it comes to your lighting. You could just use very, you know, simplistic lighting and still get the effects that you want with that face. The eyes having articulation helps. It's articulation that I don't like. It's in some ways it's too much. I prefer to just make one of the faces have the eyes in one position and keep the other one with the eyes neutral. But as you can see, every pose that I've put her in, she just looks perfect. It's kind of funny. She looks like she's floating above the seat. I love this figure. I love this figure. It's literally what I was expecting her to be when I saw those early pictures, you know, of what we were getting. She blew my mind over the Deathstroke figure, and you know I'm a DC, so I was expecting to be more like, I need to get that Deathstroke figure, and instead, when I saw this, it was like, yeah, forget Deathstroke, I'm getting this, because I've already got a bunch of Deathstrokes, you know, and I have a feeling that he's not going to be, you know, it's a design, number one, that I'm not really a fan of. Number two, he's a little bit too dynamic for my tastes for, you know, for Deathstroke. I want to be able to do simple stuff with Deathstroke, you know. But yeah, I think she definitely does, you know, scratch the itch. She has all these fundamental details and fundamental abilities that you need ninja type, you know, agile type characters to have. And then also, I mean, come on, with the whole ninja thing coming out of Japan, they're going to do her justice as they did. I mean, you have no issues with the way the sword, the sheath, none of that stuff looks bad, you know? She just looks like the character that we've been reading for all this time with a lot more hair. That's the biggest issue. So I think if you can find her for a decent price, you should pick her up. Maybe if you even can find the bootleg once this figure, because you know how these figures have been going for ridiculous prices, even though Revoltechs have been cheap in the past, much cheaper than everyone else. I mean, some of the Iron Man Revoltechs are still cheap, you know, 30, 40 bucks, whereas these other Marvel Comics Revoltech figures, Amazing Yamaguchis, they're going for like 90 bucks, you know, 75 bucks, and it's like, holy shit, this is a company that people didn't like before, you know what I mean? So maybe like Mafex, they're coming from behind and they're going to be extremely sought after figures. And, you know, if so, you can see why, you know? I mean, look at the sculpt work on the onesie, her unitard. It does a good job of showing that there's a whole bunch of material. Even though it's tight, it's still some material. They accentuated the musculature, you know, her breasts. They don't look like one big uniboob. The boots, the tabis on her feet, they all look like she's wearing a costume that has functionality to it. Even though it's revealing, there's functionality, and I like that. And that's kind of the way it needs to be, you know. So props to them for that. And I think these are all things that are going to make this a well-loved purchase, a well-loved part of your collection. If you are into the X-Men and you're missing PSYLOCKE, or like me, you had one of the 3 or 4 releases prior to this one, and they weren't doing it for you. So this has been my look at the Revoltech PSYLOCKE, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. This is A+ stuff, and I would have said S if it wasn't for the hair, but it's A+ stuff. Now, if they can give us a Jean and a Jubilee, I will be a happy camper, because I know we're getting them from, we're getting Jubilee next year from Hasbro, but if she was agile and posable and short, you know, real short, not using a pre-existing buck, I think it'd be better. So anyway, thanks for checking out my video. Check out, you know, the other videos I've done over the year. You know, happy holidays, happy Festivus, you know, Merry Christmas, happy Kwanzaa, happy Hanukkah, all that good stuff. And yeah, that's it for me. You guys have been great. Peace outside.